All right. Thank you, everybody. I want to start off by thank you, all of you, for coming out in this rainy weather to BioStrategy Partners Practical Knowledge event. I want to first thank Warren Avenue investors for hosting this event, especially Phil and Melina for getting this event all together. So my name is Brian Chow. I am the program director for BioStrategy Partners. We are a nonprofit consortium of academic and research institutions that hopes to advance early stage technologies from the academia into the marketplace. And we do this through primarily 3 programs. The one you see here, Practical Knowledge Series. We also handle the Keystone Innovation Zone, BioLaunch 611, as well as we have a small grant funding mechanisms called the Germinator program, where we match up the industry partners with the academia labs. And it's upwards of 60,000 for the project, and it's last 6 months. If you're wanting to learn more about it, I'm happy to talk more about it after this. But I wanted to thank the BioStrategy Partner sponsors, CBRE, especially Mike Maloney for getting this together. We also want to thank MVM Associates, Sci Strategy Communications, as well as Armstrong Teasdale and Stradley Ronan. With that, I would like to introduce Matt McDevitt. He is the president and CEO of Warren Avenue Investors, and he has about 30 years of commercial life sciences and real estate experience. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Matt.
All right, thank you. I will turn on my microphone and thank you. And you're actually sitting in one of my facilities at the moment. So, well, oh boy. That's terrible. Oh boy. All right, how's that, people? That good? All right, good. So a little bit about myself. 30 years in the real estate life science industry, and essentially that's all I've done. So, oops. All right, hang on. How's that?
Yeah.
Better. You know what, can't hear that. I'm a loud guy. Guess what? You can hear me. I don't need a microphone. So I lovely. This is all I've done for 30 years. In 2017, I started Warren Avenue Investors, and I'm what they call a pure player in the life science industry, real estate wise, right? So all I do is this type of space. I don't do retail, I don't do office, I don't do apartments. We only do life science real estate. So I cut my teeth in Maryland, as a real estate broker, and as the 270 corridor grew up around me, I got lucky enough to start a public company in 2004 called Biomed Realty Trust, and that was fun. I grew that company for about 10, 11 years. And we had markets in San Diego, San Francisco, Seattle, Boston, New York, New Jersey, all over the East Coast. We called it our UK office, we called the East Coast, or East Cambridge. And essentially, we had about 25 million square feet of this stuff. Sold it to Blackstone, and then that's when I started this new company.
Don't forget how many billions you sold it for.
I sold it for $8 billion. Thank you, Audrey.
Yeah.
Yes, I sold it for $8 billion and pocketed 9. But obviously, it's been my life. I've been, very, very fortunate to be part of somewhat of the life science cycle, and this is going to be a fun panel today. We're going to have a lot of fun, and let me introduce my 3 panelists. But let me start with Audrey, which she and I have known each other for years.
I don't know if I need a mic. Should I use a mic? Okay. Yeah, use the mic? Okay. Audrey Greenberg, I'm the co-founder and chief business officer at the Center for Breakthrough Medicines. We're a cell and gene therapy pure play. I'll steal your line. Contract development and manufacturing organization known as the CDMO. We have 700,000 square feet of space at the Discovery Labs, which I was also part of the founding team of, and we're based in King of Prussia. Our company now has nearly 400 people. We're doing work for a large group of clients based all over the world, and really pleased to be bringing this ecosystem to Silicon Valley, Philadelphia. My background is I started my career as an accountant, became an investment banker for a number of years on Wall Street, then worked in private equity for 10, 15 years, and moved to Philadelphia, got to know Brian O'Neill, and started the companies with him. So pleased to be here today, and happy to be on the panel. Thanks.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yep. All right. I have a little bit different background. I've been in the operating side of the pharmaceutical and biotech industry my whole life, actually over 40 years now. It's hard to say. I started my career, I'm a pharmacist originally, to a degree in pharmacy, and I was working for Merck, and a little teeny company that had no products on the market called Genentech called me to come out to San Francisco, and I helped launch their first 3 products. So I was in the marketing department of Genentech from the 1980s to the 1990s. From that point, I went back into big pharmaceutical companies and rose to senior vice president levels. And in 2009, I semi-retired at the age of 52, and I've been an independent investor in early stage drug companies since then. I've invested in over 10 companies. I've sold 2. I've got 2 very active ones right now, thanks to a couple people in this room. Actually, some of my co-investors are in this room here with me. Make sure I'm telling the story right. And but I'm 65 years old, and so I'm going to do this for a few more years. I'm my own boss, and I'm excited about passing it on to everybody else, because this is the great space to be in, right? We're saving lives, improving people's care. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Matt Medeiros from Gallagher. Gallagher is an international risk management and consulting firm. My team helps companies from really the formation as they achieve key milestones, whether that's clinical trials, IPO, or commercialization. We work to secure coverages such as D&O, clinical trials liability, key persons insurance. So we're really looking to protect the assets of the company. We have over 3,000 clients in the life science space, 250
Including us.
Including CVM, and David as well. And 250 of those being publicly traded companies. And really it spans from pharma, biotech, med device companies, diagnostics, CROs and CDMOs. So a wide range of experience, but looking forward to talking a little bit about that today. And thanks for having me on the panel.
All right, everyone. So what we're trying to do today is kind of guide you through a little bit of, like, obviously the practical knowledge series. But I think what we're trying to do is, like, hit on kind of 3 main topics. And if I can keep these panelists to the 3, that'd be great. Yeah. Is everything okay with that? So what I'll try to do is keep the panelists to, like, 3 main topics, right? Clearly, the market outlook, right, of what's it like out there for the biotechs. What are the risks that new companies are facing? And then the third, we'll try to wrap it up and hopefully be a little bit more glass half full and collaborations and things like that. So we'll try to guide the conversation that way. All these 3 panelists have a massive amount of experience and massive different experiences too. So I'm going to try to guide them. Hold off your questions hopefully till the end. But I will kick it off by saying this. You know, capital is like, or lack of capital is like an engine. And the analogy is, if you don't put oil in the engine's gonna freeze up, right? You can put as much gas as you can into it. But if you don't have oil in your engine, that engine's gonna freeze up and you won't do anything. So clearly, David, are we in a capital freezing event or a capital, you know, where are we going?
Well, I'm a glass half full, is that right, person? Yeah,
Glass
I'm
half
the
full. Yeah.
I
half
don't even know
empty
what I am.
is
So
bad.
I'm an optimist. You know, I've seen this cycle now for over 40 years, and you know, we've had one of the biggest boons in venture capital investing over the last 10 years. I mean, it's been an incredible amount of money. I think we're at a state of pause right now. Not that the money's not there. There's a lot of dry powder in these private equity groups and also in the venture groups. But they're cautious on the market conditions. They're trying to make sure that their money's being deployed accurately. And so the investment into new companies may be taking a little bit of a step back because they want to make sure they have enough dry powder to put into companies as they're going forward. And so what we're seeing is for venture capitalists that have been in this space for a long period of time, they're being a little bit more cautious in their investments going forward to make sure they have enough dry powder and they can keep their existing companies moving. That's my overall theme of the situation as far as I can see. I'm right now trying to raise capital. I'm trying to raise 2 different rounds. I'm trying to raise my first institutional round. For one company, we're looking to raise about $20 to $25 million. I'm not finding it difficult, but I've got a history, you know, so I've got people I know. I'm not going out and cold calling. I've got connections and I've got ways of looking for that. There are other people I know that are looking for money and that don't have those connections. And so, you know, this is a business, raising money is a business just like anything else. It's all about people and you having the connections and be able to make those kind of to get that kind of attraction for investment. Early stage companies, I think there's a lot of capital. When I say early stage, I'm saying pre-institutional. So if you're looking from seed to pre-institution, Series A, there are enough people out there looking to try and get into the space, and including me. I do that all the time. And I'm not shy about making investments, but I am more cautious making sure I'm making the right investments. The outlook, I think, right now is that most people that are making investments into early stage companies want to make sure that the business model is de-risked. And what I mean by that is that as you look at a business model and you look at all the different things that could go wrong over a period of time as you go through each step of financing, have they started to answer some of the questions of things that could be risks going along, whether it's clinical risks or preclinical risk, whether it's staffing risk, whether it's space risk, whether it's supply risk. And we'll talk about risk later, but I actually had Jackson Labs many of you may know Jackson Labs. They've been doing business for me for years. They gave up on one preclinical model the minute we were trying to get it started. They actually gave up on the model. They stopped it. And we had to go overseas to get it. It took us 6 to 12 months to get that redone at a tremendous amount of expense and pain because we were still burning money, right, Ben? But not getting to the situation where we were getting any data. And that was an unforeseen risk that we didn't know could happen. So those are the kind of things that they're wanting to make sure that you have everything lined up. Do you have the people? Do you have the talent? Do you have all of the numbers are in line with what your expectations are? That's the stuff that I think you have to be really prepared for in this market. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think also track record. The biotech index is down 5% year to date now. It used to be a lot worse. And we're down 45% year to date on capital raise versus last year. But last year was an all-time high. So I don't know if it's frozen. I mean, I think you're right. There's definitely money flowing into the space for later stage assets, sort of flight to quality. I was surprised to hear about the seed capital, though. That's interesting. I wasn't aware that there was so much money flowing in at the seed level, but that's good to hear. I mean, for those that are starting companies, certainly, you know, as I think about our company, the Center for Breakthrough Medicines, and being a CDMO, we've seen, yes, people killing pipeline projects and potentially, you know, getting less revenue because of it, but we're also seeing an uptick in outsourcing. So that's been interesting too. I mean, although capital is tight, you want to extend your dollars to get to the next key value inflection point. How do you spend the least amount of money to get to that next FDA tipping point? And I think you do that a little bit more through outsourcing. If you go back 2 years ago, the people were getting higher valuations for building their own manufacturing. You were seeing a premium for people that had captive manufacturing. Now everyone's looking at those companies saying, you are 90% empty in this space. Why did you build this and spend $200 million when you could have had more optionality, right? And so it's nice to have that manufacturing partner to do that with.
So it's interesting, and I'll pass over to Matt in a little bit, but if you think about some stats, right? 22% of all revenue last year was generated by two companies, right? Pfizer and Moderna. So they're loaded up with cash, right? All the pharmas are loaded up with cash, right? There's a bevy of drugs coming off of patent, so they're all just ready to pounce. And what Audrey was saying is, in other words, is valuations are down, and science doesn't follow a lease expiration date. Science doesn't follow, capital really, right? I mean, they're going to find capital regardless, and it's how they come about their capital, and all of that practically, right? Practical knowledge. As I'll turn it over to Matt, is like, how is that really going to be practically? How are you going to do it, right? I mean, what are the risks really? When you think about this, this tough time. I mean, how is really a biotech going to go surf through this massive, risk factor?
Yeah, and I think a couple things I'll touch on. So when you're thinking about attracting board talent and executives today, boards are dealing with a complex regulatory environment. They're dealing with risks they never had to deal with in the past. So a company at the early stages that's attracting their first institutional round is going to be, charged with having to protect not only the executives but the employees, and it's a tough landscape. So having something like a well-structured directors and officers liability policy right up front, and showing those board members that you have a plan in place to protect them, to protect the organization. Kind of talking a little bit more about what David was alluding to, making sure that that framework is put in place to really allow for growth over time. When I look at an early stage biotech company, you've got the idea of you're getting into a lab maybe for the first time, and how are we selecting that space? So just to kind of give you an example, you're looking at lab space, you're thinking about, what could happen here that could potentially disrupt my operations. And, sometimes the mundane risks don't always come into your mind, right? You might be thinking about, okay, how are we going to protect against a, refrigeration going out if there's something that needs, refrigeration, or there's animal protesters. People are dealing with public relations issues these days too. So thinking about how are we going to shield ourselves from that? Maybe you put your lab in a sub-level, and that lab is susceptible to water, for example. And this is something that's happened. The water, there's a water intrusion event, and that totally disrupts your ability to continue doing your operations. So sometimes the mundane things that we're not, where everybody's thinking about these new risks that are happening, cyber risks, risks associated with your 3PL, you're moving, components places, and you're shipping stuff off to your partners, and all of that is, ever more complex as the world's more connected and virtual, and people are outsourcing things. But you also have to just think about the, natural catastrophes for as one example.
Are the costs coming down on premiums and stuff, or what's going on?
So yeah, no, that's a good question. A question that answer I think every day now. And actually, it's within. So I think that depends on the policy that you're talking about. But from a directors and officers standpoint, publicly traded companies have seen massive decreases in premiums actually over the past year, and part of that is private companies, not as much, but the premiums also did not rise with like a hockey stick growth over time. So what's happened is that's become more of a competitive market. But cyber risk on the others, that's a totally different story. We're seeing a huge increase in ransomware events. So it's really depends on what policies you're talking about.
Well, let's pivot to people, right? Scientists. Well, we think we're in a great region, right, to hire people. But so does every other region, right? Cambridge, Maryland, North Carolina. What separates the Philly region, right, in to hire the best talent? Because it's the number one thing, of course, after real estate, that's difficult, that we hear is a problem, always.
I think Philly is actually relatively easy to hire versus some of the other biotech clusters. San Francisco, Boston, North Carolina. We have 70,000 life science employees, 10,000 of which with cell and gene therapy experience. And there's a great mix of big pharma, right? You've got Janssen, you have Merck, you have GSK, you've got BM, everything is right here. And then you also have, the baby pens and CHOP spinoffs, and people are trading up on those jobs. And then you've got academia, and you have the great educational institutions that are producing talent every day. So I think that's all wonderful. But there's certain positions that are certainly easier to hire than others, right? I mean, there's our analytical development positions, or certain pieces of equipment which are hard to understand to operate. Those positions are harder to hire in than sort of just more general. But we can hire in cell and gene therapy. We can hire someone that was an aseptic clean room person from biologics or vaccines, and we can train in cell and gene therapy through our training academy that we've created, or take a cell and gene therapy person and train them in aseptic processing. But I think the talent's great.
David, what do you think?
Well, it's a complex question, actually, because I'm actually
People
trying,
always are very complex.
Well, I'm trying to hire a chief medical officer right now, and I don't care where that person lives. No, I mean, really don't. I mean,
Okay.
we've now proven that we don't have to do that. So what I'm looking for is the best person. It's got the best talent. And this particular company I have is up in New Haven, Connecticut. So in that particular space, they can fly and be up there, but I'm looking for someone who really has the right type of talents that we need. So, but as you go down through the organization, you want to have people that are actually working in the labs and so forth. That's a whole different environment. And I agree with Audrey on that, is that, I think that we have a good quality of life in the greater Philadelphia area. The Eagles are 10-1 or 11-1. 11-1.
11-1.
I'm a Broncos fan, so we're 5-7. It's kind of an interesting thing is that I think that people can be very selective now in the types of roles that they want to take on, and so you're having this competition. But what I always ascribe to is that when somebody joins a company, they want to have a vision. They want to know that they're going to something that's going to really be powerful. So you got to sell them on the culture. You got to sell them on the prospects of it. You got to sell them on the business plan. You got to sell them on the fact that this is going to be an ongoing company, and that's harder for smaller companies, but it's really important. I mean, again, going back to the case where I am right now, we actually have a half of employee in the company, and I've got to hire 7 people. But I'm going to be hiring high-level people, and I'm selling them on the prospects of what it could be. So they read the business plan. They read our anticipation of where we're going to be, what the exit will be, how we're going to be paying very great salaries and equity and grants and so forth for these people. But they've got to believe in the mission and the milestones, and they got to believe that you're going to be able to execute. Look at how many companies don't execute, right? How many companies go south? Most. 90%. Yeah. So you got to sell them. And as the CEO of a company or whoever the people are that are managing it, you got to, if you want to find the best people, you got to seek them out and sell them on the business, sell them on the prospects, and have the vision to let them know where they're going. There's another company that we have in the Bluebell area that brilliant scientist, right, Todd? Yes, brilliant scientist. And he's been able to attract a lot of good talent, young talent. But they've always got to remember that they're starting at the base level of something, and it could go to something much bigger. So you got to keep them motivated, and that's not easy when you're looking at postdocs, that are in their 20s and 30s, and they're trying to be, well, hey, where am I going to go next? Should I go to Merck? Should I get stability at Merck, or am I really going to be is this going to be the next Genentech? So it's a complex question depending on the positions, but people make the company. Intellectual property keeps the company, but people make the company.
Audrey, so obviously, Breakthrough Medicine, you have been on a hiring spree, right? Have to be. And Matt, chime in a little bit with this, with the practical side of things, right? I mean, what does she do to protect employees to stay, the contracts and all the rest? Audrey, give us a little perspective on where did you go? How did you get them? What was the secret sauce to literally like come work for us? Yeah. We're basically a startup, right? I mean,
yeah. Well, I think that's a selling point, candidly. I mean, it's exciting to work for a startup and be able to create something all your own. We have a very interesting story, right? We saw a huge need in the market that has really high barriers to entry. There's not a lot of supply, all the standard of like, what kind of business do you want to start? Check, 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 So it's a good story to tell when you're attracting talent. And then we have a team that is incredible. I mean, it's talent attracts talent, right? And so you start with a couple good people, and if they're excited and they want to charge forward, it sort of creates a buzz and it attracts more talent. So we've been lucky in that people have brought in their friends and their colleagues from other positions. And then we do a lot of stuff on like LinkedIn and branding that shows people what our culture is all about. And it creates an atmosphere of sort of fun, work hard, play hard, enjoy what you're doing every day, and hopefully have a smile on your face when you leave.
Yeah, and it's a kind of, I'm like Debbie Downer sometimes when I come in and think about this
Matt,
stuff.
we knew you'd be the practical side, but like,
I'm like, wait.
is that glass half empty?
Waking up at 3 a.m. in sweats thinking about somebody getting hurt, but
yeah, but give the folks the practical side of Audrey's and David's challenges every day, right? I mean, these guys want to know what it takes to literally land them.
Right. Yeah, I think whenever you're growing a team and going at warp speed trying to do that and hiring people and creating procedures and putting employee benefits plans in place and doing all these things to build a good foundation, things can happen. And what it really comes down to is, do you have the right SOPs in place? Do you have the right foundation from a risk management standpoint to make sure that everybody can safely do their job and grow the company? So what I'm seeing a lot these days too, when our clients are selecting CROs, CDMOs, there's, from a contract standpoint, you've got contractual requirements for, who's responsible for what. So if I'm shipping my cells to Audrey's facility, are they, what are the operating procedures to make sure that there's quality there? The FDA can come in and shut down an operation any day, unexpected. And how does that impact an early stage company that's doing, trying to do their R&D, and what kind of disruption does that cause? So it's really important when you're picking the right partners to make sure that you're doing your due diligence, but then also selecting the right partner to help you get through that.
So David, I'll turn it back to you a little bit. Is it an international search for people? Do they granularly ask you where the capital is coming from? I mean, how love culture? We live on culture. We live on that kind of society. But when it comes right down to it, I mean, this is a practical society, and you guys are dealing with a lot of companies. I mean, how do these people really say, yeah, I'm moving from San Francisco to Bluebell, Pennsylvania, right? I mean...
Well, I haven't had that happen yet. Although I did, so I moved from San Francisco here. And it's the best city in town, in the country. To be honest with you, I can't answer that because I think a lot of times it's going to depend on a lot of circumstances. It's going to depend on family, where do they live, what are they trying to do. I'm a Midwest Western guy that moved to San Francisco, and I couldn't wait to get out of there. I really did. Okay. First time they tell you they want to throw some vegetables on the barbecue, you want to get out of there right away. But yeah, I don't know if I can answer that question intelligently, but I think the key thing is that if they believe that the company is going to be something that's going to be real, sustainable, is going to be life-changing from a career perspective. I mean, I have to be honest, my career was defined by going to Genentech. I mean, that changed my world. I was at Merck, I went to Genentech. The next thing you know, I felt like there wasn't anything I couldn't do. Because you become part of something much bigger than yourself. And people look for that, and they really do. I mean, even our company in Bluebell, they keep asking me questions about the Genentech days, and that's what they want to envision. They want to see that happen here. What Audrey's putting together, what's happening down at the Science Center. Those are people that are working for those companies. They want to see Philly be on the map. They want to see a big, they want to see every day a new Spark Therapeutics come out. And they believe it can happen. And I believe it can. There's no question about it. So we just have to keep instilling that into people. And when you start talking that way, things do happen. And that's,
yeah, and it's nice that we're in like a patient-focused, and you mentioned this, David, earlier, mission-driven companies. I mean, if we're attracting people from other industries, it's nice to know that you're saving lives and you're impacting patients and their families, and we're dealing with cancer and rare disease. And you see these babies that have spinal muscular atrophy or Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, and knowing that these kids that were going to die by age 5 can now live a full, I mean, that makes me want to go to work every day. And it's very compelling when you're talking to talent that, switching jobs or looking at our industry to have a patient-focused environment too.
Another pivot, and believe me, it's what drives me too. Just being in the path of life science. Okay, starting a company. What is the one thing that keeps you up at night?
One?
You can pick many.
Well, the thing that you have to always be concerned about is making payroll. No matter what else happens,
Okay.
making payroll is the most important thing that could ever happen. If you have paid employees. Now, like I said, I have companies where we don't have paid employees. We're all working for stock. But then the ones where you do have employees, you got to make the payroll, you got to make the insurance, got to pay our insurances, our D&O insurance. Utilities and things like that, the rent, that can always go a little later. But they make enough money, right? You can get them a couple months back, that's okay. But, I think it's about the people. And I know I've said this a couple times, but the people make the company. It's the science is the science and the IP is so forth, but it's the people that deliver the results. And so you got to keep the people motivated, you got to keep the people paid, you got to keep people passionate. And that's what I think is always drives me, is to make sure that people are feel like they're part of something bigger, and they're well compensated and taken care of. And if you do that, a lot of times they'll do that for you.
I've never started a company before, but so not really sure I can answer that one. But
We know that other people ask you this question.
yeah,
I mean, what's the number one thing that they ask you to protect them against?
yeah, no, I think that's a fair question. So I think a lot of times, the very first need is, at the board level, people are worried about, okay, we're taking in outside money, we're hiring all these people, we're potentially going to, do a clinical trial where people can get hurt. So how's a clinical trials policy going to protect me? How's a well-structured D&O policy going to protect my personal interests? So I think that they're looking for protection of the company itself, but also of the individual directors and officers and the C-suite. But then, once you get started, every day in the lab is risky. I mean, something can happen, a fire could break out, somebody get burned by chemicals. So making sure that there's training there, making sure that, you have, again, the right SOPs to keep people safe.
Yeah, when I started the company 4 years ago, when you first start, it's always about cash, right? How are we going to get to the payroll? And then hopefully you complete your first round of capital, and then it becomes about satisfying the investors, right? It's like, I promised I was going to do this when I raised the capital. So meeting expectations and executing on the business plan becomes what keeps you up every night, and always keeping your eye on the cash, obviously, too. And then it's, keeping the employees happy. But I think the number one thing is just capital, right? You got to make sure you have it.
Yeah, it does go. Even I know that, running a real estate company. But, okay, we know IPOs are down. We know that VC funding is pretty much, year after year down. But we know that science has to have capital, right? It has to, right? I mean, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 doesn't stop. So where do we think it's gonna come from, right? Stats say big pharma has all the cash in the bank, right? Historically we know that. I mean, there's a crazy stat that basically says that, like, with all the year in cash that pharma has, they could buy out literally 100% premium the small and mid cap companies with all the cash they have. It's tremendous. Will big pharma be the next IPO? Like, will they be the ones that will fill that gap?
Well, they already are. I mean, strategic venture funds that's one of your first sources. JJDC, or what do they ever call it now? Johnson Innovation Fund. Novartis has 2 funds. Merck has, Pfizer has 3 funds. Lilly has funds, and so they're the first people we go to, are the strategics. The strategic venture funds generally, but here they don't. They're very cautious in the sense that, because everybody's going to go to them first, and they're going to. But they're really, you have to fit within their scientific interest, their field of interest. So you got to be selective on what you're doing. Now, one of the particular companies I'm involved with has a dermatological product, alopecia. There's 2 companies right now that are very vested in alopecia, hair loss, Lilly and Pfizer. If you don't know that, they're really invested in it. And so I'm playing each other off each other. And I'm trying to figure out how to best get in. Now, they have looked at our technology. For years, they've looked at our technology. And they say, we're really interested in when you prove it in man. But we're still in the preclinical phase. So we've got to get that pivotal interest to say that we're right now at that point where we've de-risked the science enough that they can make a bet, a gambled bet, in an early stage company such as ourselves to take them to the next step forward. International funds, Asuko, a number of them in Europe and stuff like that we've had conversations with too, but they all look at, does it fit their specific area of interest. The venture groups, they can be relatively agnostic to that. I mean, a lot of times they're like lemmings, whatever the coolest thing is, then they all want to jump into it. Cell therapy, I'm just kidding. There too, they're going to look at the investment thesis and say, what's the return on investment? What's the timeline? What's the challenges? Can they execute against the plan? Do they have realistic timelines? So they're going to dig deep into this, and this takes 6 months. It takes 6 months to do an institutional round, no question.
Twice as long as it did last year.
Yeah. And so they're digging into everything, and by that time they're saying, okay, now they're making a gambled bet. So I think that the large pharma venture funds are going to be the ones that are going to drive this again in this time, and they're not really worried about the ups and downs of the market, whereas the venture groups are, because they're limited, so are the ones that are going through this. So the strategic, I call them strategic venture funds. Even GSK used to have one, SR1. Now it's called, I don't know what it's called now. It's called something else, I think. But those are the ones that are pretty agnostic to even the market trends.
And M&A is up, actually. I think we have the highest number of M&A deals this year since 1980. So the dollar amounts are down because the valuations are down, but the volume is still there. And it's very interesting because pharma, I mean, most of the people in the room know this, but like the big pharmas basically got out of discovery, right? They're really not in R&D. They're more M&A shops. Now they call it, I think they call it M&L, not, mergers and licensing or whatever, or A&L. And they, it's interesting that I think the pockets of capital, so we did a $350 million raise last December from SK. So SK is a sovereign, right? They're not a sovereign, but they're from South Korea. And essentially, a lot of the capital is coming from overseas. I mean, from the Middle East, from Asia. There are huge pockets of wealth, global wealth, that are looking to diversify in ESG, right? Environmental, social, governance, and healthcare happens to fit in that. And so, like we saw with South Korea, they were very big on ESG. They were diversifying out of oil and gas and batteries and essentially wanted to go big into healthcare. And so you'll see a lot of diversification out of some of the old industries into the new. Big pharma is certainly a pocket of capital, but the venture capital firms still have tons of dry powder. The PE shops, some of the larger sort of private equity funds, Blackstones of the world, et cetera. But there's a lot of capital out there.
All right, I'm going to kind of wrap it up and go into Q&A, and hopefully this has been informative, certainly for me, and we thank you, panelists. So give them a round of applause, everyone. I will open it up to the questions for in the audience. Okay, yes.
Goes to my point before. They want to know that whoever's going to put money in, think about it for a second. If you're going to put in $30 to $40 million, and they're looking at there saying, boy, this is cool science. Not proven yet, because it's still early. And yeah, these people are smart. They're really smart. They figured this all out. But they've never run a company. Can they deliver? It's all about delivery. It's all about executing. You don't take your car to a place that just opens up. It's got a nice, shiny place and a lot of young people, and they say, we're all been trained. We just got out of school yesterday. And do you know anything about Audis? Read about them. You want to go where somebody's got experience. Now, what will happen, though, a lot of times, is that, the early stage, there's a number of early stage venture groups, 5AM, Versant, Canaan, there's Frazier gets involved with this early stage. Those people will come in and look at the management team, and they'll say, do we keep the scientists and bring in our own? And so I was part of something that did that once. So I helped fund a company that had great science, but I was the only guy that had any experience on it, and I was that had an early stage startup company. And I told the venture group, I said, I'll step aside. You bring in your own CEO that you want. And that was perfect. That's what they wanted. So they'll bring in their own CEO and their own finance people, and that's kind of how they'll work with that. But they're not going to just write a check and walk away. Well, you're right. I mean, and this is the part that drives the scientists crazy, because they think that whatever they're doing, they can cure the world, right, of all these different things. But at the end of the day, it comes down to probability of success. What is the probability of technical success? Can we actually do this and prove it? Then is, what's the cost to getting to that point? And then the third thing is the time. How much time? Everything takes twice as long and costs twice as much as anybody will ever tell you it will be. So they automatically multiply it by 2, right? And then you marry all those different opportunities together, and then that's how you make a decision. So it's called portfolio management. I did this for Genentech, I did this for Abbott, and I did this also for Aventis or Sanofi. But every year we would redo the portfolio of the development programs. And we update the assumptions, and we say, where do we want to make our bets? And sometimes you drop programs. So you said, you know what, it's taken longer. There's new risks that have come up. There are timeline issues. The competition has changed. But every year you go back and rebalance the portfolio based upon what the knowns are at that year. And as you know, we've got one good example of that we're dealing with right now. Lots of opportunities with it.
Yeah, the fourth thing I would add is that, cost, time, risk, and fourth, market. The commercial viability, like who are these patients? Are they out there? How are you going to get to them? How the doctor is going to administer the drug? Where are you going to go to do the trial? How are you going to get the patients in the trial? Do they have to come to you? Are you going to go to them? I mean, that is the one thing I would say most people forget is the commercial viability of the product and the way that it's distributed and administered. And so very, very important to you.
I would agree, but I think most people that have been in the field, we do that, but it takes, for the neophyte entrepreneur and scientist, right, they don't do that. But that's where you get people that have commercial experience.
Some of the big pharma, though, even they make that mistake. They're like, oh, well, we didn't realize that injecting it into your stomach 3 times a day was a bad idea when they could just take a pill, So sometimes you just got to look at how the drug is administered. Is it easy? Does it need to be refrigerated? Does it not? I mean, you can have a drug that's further along that in one that's sort of earlier stage, and it could disrupt the other one if it's easier to administer.
I'll tell you a quick story about one of my tenants that Regeneron, and we were just growing them like crazy, and I literally asked like, what happened? And Eylea, the drug, it's a macular degeneration drug, and literally they said to me, would you like to actually, like the drug that actually was before ours, you had to get 2 shots in your eye a month. And I'm like, ooh. And so our drug has 1 shot in the eye. Would you like that? I'm like, yeah, I'd definitely take that over 2 shots. So it's like, yeah, you're right. Like with a simple thing. We can go forever. I want to respect everyone's time. We are at, Phil?
Yeah, we got 10 minutes if anyone has any more questions.
Any questions, anyone? Yeah.
Is there any either recently passed legislation or legislation that you guys are concerned about that broadly you think could have negative implications on the industry, whether it be on the investment side, the clinical side? Is there anything that stands out to you guys? It's like, yeah, this isn't a good thing. We'd like to see it change.
Well, there's always the risk of national health care, which, again, is good and bad. But at the end of the day, we work in a capitalist market. This is a free enterprise market in the United States. So when I was at Genentech in 1985, we launched the first human growth hormone for $25,000 a year. And people gasped. And insurance companies complained. And, it's just like, how can you gouge so much for that? But at the end of the day, they didn't have any opportunities because everything was cadaver-oriented before that. So there was, what's it called, Jacobs-Kreusch disease, where if you were a person of short stature, you had to have pituitary extracts from dead people that would put in growth hormone. And so this changed the medicine dramatically. And then later on, we launched TPA, which was $2,000 per shot versus streptokinase, which was $2,500. But it comes into the price of innovation. We were a company that was starting. And at the end of the day, we proved that it was cost effective, but it took time. I worked for a short time at Genzyme for Gaucher disease. Cerezyme was about $160,000 a year for treatment, cost of treatment. And now look at $2.5 million for gene therapy. But if it's only used once, and that's in a capitalist society, that's always going to be, somebody's going to have to bear that cost, and I think that's justified. But the whole world is moving towards cost containment in healthcare, and so I always worry about that. But that's been going on for 40 years, And there are still better ways. Again, it tends to be for the breakthrough therapies that this happens for, not the things where you're making modest improvements or improvements somehow along the way of what's standard of care is. But for breakthrough therapies, price is always going to be something that we have to pay as a pivot. Another thing I worry about is, this is me personally, because I do a lot of recombinant treatments, is that having the biological exception, the 10-year biological exception is important to me. Even though our patents may run out, we get 10 years of exclusivity because it takes so much time to bring a recombinant product through the system. It's getting less, but it still takes time, and so that to me is an important thing. Then as goes to patents, well, I'd ask Pat in the back, Pat Kelly, if he's got any ideas on the patent stuff, because he knows all about that. But I think that we got a lot of good patent attorneys around here, I can tell you that. Pat's one of them in the back there. But we got a lot of good patent attorneys around here, and they've helped me out dramatically. So I don't worry too much about patent changes in legislation. I guess
Also,
that's...
the geopolitical environment is also interesting. We saw during the pandemic where you weren't able to get supplies or products from a lot of parts of the world, and so there was a tremendous focus on onshoring manufacturing, and even the Biden administration now has a tremendous amount of capital behind onshoring manufacturing, and I think that's a good thing. I still think some of the component parts are always going to come from Asia and China, and we just need to think about how we manage through these supply chain crises and how the government eventually deals with some of those issues and puts capital to work to, get rid of some of those issues or possibly work on the geopolitical environment so it's not so uncertain.
All right, I'll wrap it up with, oh, go ahead. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
What is the risk discussion around when to publish your data? It's not phase 3, we were trying to educate clinicians to treat patients, but from an early phase perspective, when you're trying to get investors, how soon do you show your hand?
Well, again, that goes to intellectual property. I mean, right? That's the first and foremost, is that when you publish, it's in the public domain. So anything that's patentable, you want to make sure that that's taken care of ahead of time. Big pharma doesn't like to publish, preclinical data, and that's fine. They don't need to. Early stage companies need to publish preclinical data. You got to get the visibility for it. And so, if you're an early stage company, publishing to me is critical. We want to publish right away, whatever we can. Now, you want to get it into a high quality journal, peer-reviewed journal. So you got to make sure that the studies are going to have statistically powered enough to show a difference. That they're conducted in a very rigorous fashion, that you've got people that are well known in the space that are conducting it. So we're right now putting together an abstract and presentation for the DI, the Society of Investigational Dermatology, which is in May. And we're very excited to get that out there as quick as possible, because it's going to make a difference on our ability to raise capital. It really will. So as an early stage company, yes, that's important, I think.
All right, everyone, I appreciate everyone coming out, and thank you, panelists. This was great for me. One last question. All right, the NIH budget now is $45 billion, right? 45. The NIH budget is $45 billion. Where do we think that's going to go? How that's going to impact where you take new startups? Do you rely on NIH grants? Do you rely, so where does that lead us to?
I rely on all non-dilutive capital, any way you can get it. Department of Defense has been good to me. I can tell you that for most of the companies I've been involved with, the Department of Defense, because the things that we're doing either have a threat reduction, a societal benefit that we don't currently have, and the Department of Defense is very active in that. The NIH, yes, they have a lot of money, but they did get cutbacks, as you know, in the last several years, and there's a lot of competition for it. SBIR, STTR, I mean, that's a whole other area of going out and getting capital. Any way you can do it, you do it, is the way I look at it. Just go for it, but you have to realize that it's a very competitive market for it, so you don't rely on it to be the only source of capital.
Well, thank you, everyone, for coming, and it was great. Audrey, David, Matt, thank you very much, and thank you, everyone, for coming. So.